The chessboard is set, and the road to a campaign against Iran is getting shorter after Iran's missile drill lit up the red warning lights in Israel. So, is a new war with Iran only a matter of time? Israel is making preparations, while the world watches with growing concern. During his upcoming meeting with President Donald Trump in Florida, Prime Minister Netanyahu will present new strike options on Iran in order to get a green light to go in, and we will bring you some more details about Netanyahu's goals for the meeting with Donald Trump, including what the plan is on all fronts. And meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, the Hamas terrorist organization continues to rebuild and is steadily regaining control over the civilian population. They do not want to move to phase B of the ceasefire agreement, and they are filling their ranks by recruiting young people from the mosques and giving them money. We'll get into the move that Israel must take to destroy terror. In the northern arena, Hezbollah built a weapons smuggling network through Syria despite all the efforts to stop them, but Israel is continuing to hit them. And in the last 24 hours, there were 2 strikes in the same village within minutes of each other, demonstrating that while in Gaza, the IDF is set on the yellow line, but now Israel has marked the annihilation zone in Lebanon. However, another challenge we face is a tunnel network for smuggling along the Syria-Iraq border built by the pro-Iranian militias and meant to supply armed groups throughout this region. And meanwhile, ISIS is attempting to make a comeback in Syria, and the Americans are hitting them hard with a campaign of airstrikes, and we'll tell you all about it and how Israel fits into this picture. We'll also tell you about Israel's brilliant geopolitical chess move that has stabilized our relationship with Egypt, while London is going crazy after a British citizen was exposed as a Hamas leader, putting pressure on Prime Minister Starmer to take action. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, bringing you all the truth of what's happening in Israel. Are we moving towards another strike in Iran? Against the backdrop of concern in Jerusalem that the Iranians are accelerating the pace of rebuilding their ballistic missile array, Israeli officials are warning that an upcoming Revolutionary Guards missile drill could conceal preparations for an attack. And at the same time, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's upcoming trip to Florida and the American moves in the region point to an approaching broad confrontation. This leaves us with 4 open arenas, 1 red line, and the question that remains is not if, but when the situation will escalate, as experts warn that another collision is only a matter of time. The question is, who will blink first amidst the hints attacks and the peak preparations on both sides? At their upcoming meeting in Florida, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will present the President of the United States with updates and updated intelligence on Iran, on Hamas, on Hezbollah, but at the top of the political echelon they believe that a difficult mission awaits him. The central dispute on Gaza is about the amount of time that will be given to Hamas to disarm of its weapons, while regarding Iran, there is a question about whether Israel will be satisfied with a green light to strike without the United States. And regarding Lebanon, there is a cautious optimism. And what about Egypt and the meeting with al-Sisi? It is not expected to happen, and we'll bring you all the details about why. In the Gaza Strip, IDF forces encountered 3 different incidents over the last 24 hours in which terrorists crossed the yellow line and threatened them, so under instruction, the Air Force struck these terrorists. And in related news, Hamas is consolidating governments and collecting taxes on the goods that Israel is bringing in, while intelligence officials assess that their new strategy is to seek a hudna, a temporary ceasefire, for the purpose of rearming. Israel, for its part, has presented a firm line in the negotiations for Phase B, while Iran continues to send funds, but Hamas is dealing with delays in paying salaries, indicating a shortage of money. In the northern arena, Since Operation Arrows of the North, the IDF created in southern Lebanon a perimeter line, a so-called black line, which the soldiers keep clear of movement by hostile elements, and sometimes they still find Hezbollah assets in these locations. But on the adjacent border, Hezbollah has apparently rebuilt a weapon smuggling network through Syria and is exploiting the inability of the new Syrian regime to enforce its control over all parts of the country, along with a difficulty of the Lebanese army to effectively monitor the Syria-Lebanon border. In international affairs, the British Treasury is examining imposing sanctions on Yair Birawai, a Palestinian British activist who was accused of ties to Hamas and a central role in the flotilla to the Gaza Strip. Birawi has been filmed several times alongside senior Hamas officials, including former leader Ismail Haniyeh. So we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, bringing you the full truth about what's happening in Israel on day 808 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are acting under the control of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we start, I want to invite you to become ambassadors of the truth. How? By sharing these videos with as many people as possible and by hitting the subscribe button. You can also leave a comment, tell me where you're coming from, and make sure that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we're starting today's report with a look at the threats from Iran. Senior Israeli officials warned the Trump administration over the weekend that a missile drill being carried out by Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps could serve as a cover story for preparations for an actual attack against Israel. According to sources in Israel, even though intelligence information at this stage points only to troop movements within Iran, the IDF's risk threshold today is far lower than what it was in the past, and anything suspicious will raise many red flags. And behind the scenes, the IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, spoke on Saturday with the commander of the U.S. Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, and expressed concerns to him about the drill that the Revolutionary Guards began just a few days ago. According to the sources, Zamir warned that the latest missile movements and the additional operational steps by Iran could serve as a cover for a surprise attack and called for a tight coordination between American and Israeli forces in defensive preparedness. Cooper arrived on Sunday in Tel Aviv and met with Zamir and other senior IDF officials to discuss the situation. Israeli sources said that intelligence is identifying early signs of renewed building of Iran's missile force by a higher motivation that has seen since the 12-day war in June. At the end of the war, Iran was left with only about 1,500 missiles compared to about 3,000 beforehand, and with about 200 launchers out of 400 that it had possessed when this war began. Since then, Tehran has taken steps to rehabilitate the array, but has not yet returned to pre-war levels. According to assessments by the Israeli Defensive Forces and the Intelligence Directorate and the Mossad, the current rehabilitation pace does not require urgent military action in the next 2 to 3 months, but it could become a more urgent issue later in the year. As a reminder, yesterday it was reported that Western diplomats are reporting contacts that Iran is conducting with China and with Russia to receive military assistance alongside redeployments in its missile array in an attempt to rebuild all of its capabilities. On Saturday, Western intelligence bodies warned that suspicious movements were identified amongst the Revolutionary Guards missile units, as reported by the opposition channel Iran International. According to the report, the activity includes movements and coordination that deviates from normal patterns and integrates drone units, missile units, and air defenses of the Islamic Republic. Western officials that are familiar with the matter noted that it may be a military exercise, but the scope of the activity, its frequency, and the fact that it was carried out simultaneously across several branches drew increased attention and led to a deeper examination. It was also reported that intelligence bodies are tracking command and control systems, deployments, and logistical movements linked to the Revolutionary Guard's aerospace force. And over the upcoming weekend, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to visit the United States President Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. He and other Israeli officials who will also be part of the summit will present a plan to try and create a different security reality over time. And on the table are 4 open arenas even before the issue of the IDF's force building and the security assistance following Saudi Arabia's armament agreement by the United States. The central issue remaining on the crossroads is Iran. In Israel and also in the United States, they clearly identify the Iranian moves. At this stage, Iran is freezing its nuclear program, but is busy rebuilding assurances that it can be safeguarded, which is a lesson from the massive damage that they sustained during Operation Rising Lion. Iran understands that in order to deter Israel and win a future war against it, it needs massive firepower that will enable strikes on the Israeli home front and cause casualties and widespread damage. On that end, it is acting urgently to obtain air defensive systems and to rebuild and strengthen the ring of proxies all around Israel through Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other militias in Syria, in Iraq, and other places. And at the end of Operation Rising Lion, Israel had destroyed about 50% of the total missile and launcher order of the battle from Iran's arsenal. Since then, Iran has been in a dizzying arm race, with the main investment of resources directed directly to missiles, drones, and UAVs projects. Israel has marked a red line for a strike, and we are approaching that red line now. But in order to strike, we need a green light from President Trump, and it is likely that Israel wants the United States military to become a leading partner in such a move. However, Israeli officials also understand that on the road to Iran, compromises will be required in Gaza, adjustments in Syria, and smart and cautious action in Lebanon. In the IDF, they are now building plan upon plan, forming a new target bank and trying to get inside the heads of all the players on the Middle Eastern chessboard. And here at TBN Israel, we'll be here to support the full truth and let you know what's happening here. So if you want to help us, make sure to share this video and to hit the subscribe button. And speaking of boots, I want to speak to you for just a moment about one of our partners. So right now in Israel, thousands of soldiers are wearing their boots and standing on the front lines in harm's way to protect their communities, all of us, and Israel. They're strong, they're committed, and they're prepared. But there is still more that we can do to support them by helping provide the extra equipment that keeps them safer, more protected, and better equipped to face what lies ahead. The Israel Magen Fund is working to empower these soldiers with critical gear, including ceramic vests, tactical helmets, protective eyewear, advanced backpacks, and other essentials that help meet real field needs. This isn't about comfort, it's about survival. And every piece of gear makes a tangible difference for someone's son, for someone's brother, or for someone's friend who is risking everything. At a time when we pray for peace, we're also called to stand with those who carry the burden of defense, physically and also spiritually. So every gift is an act of gratitude, of partnership, and of faith. So to take part and stand with the IDF soldiers of Israel, visit israelmagenfund.org/give. Again, that's israelmagenfund.org/give. And now, we're getting back into the news and switching our focus to the Gaza Strip, but this time a bit differently from how we usually report, because I need to tell you right from the start that we're not trying to hide anything here. The lives of ordinary Gazans are terrible. They are suffering. And in recent days, our sources went out to speak with Gazan civilians to understand what's happening on the ground. In conversations that we held with sources familiar with the details, they laid out for us the method within which the Hamas terrorist organization and their operatives, they are orchestrating a whole system of recruitment, enforcement, and also civilian control. They recruit young people from the mosques who carry out the instructions that are imposed on them. That's how they manage to build their forces and recruit more people. They give them money, give them food and other humanitarian aid, and they themselves steal and provide them protection. They also provide a form of law and order through their special police force for men, where they're also a police for women, separately in another area. And they ensure the security of what are called mass weddings. Hamas also collects taxes from the merchants by force against their will. Their rule has spread everywhere to impose control and to put out an image that inside the Gaza Strip, Hamas still rules. Hamas is also reorganizing to protect itself, taking abandoned houses and using them as headquarters and also as torture centers. It monitors anyone who opposes it or writes against it, threatens, kidnaps, and also tortures. At the top of Hamas's priorities today is raising funds to secure its future, and to that end, Hamas and its people have begun looting houses of people who have left the Gaza Strip, knowing that they are unlikely to ever return due to their reluctance to travel and fear of being arrested on the border crossings. So the terrorist organization is also busy tightening the borders opposite the IDF and also trying to provoke a response in order to generate international criticism against Israel for any military response. For instance, on Sunday, 5 terrorists who crossed the yellow line in the Gaza Strip in 3 different incidents and threatened IDF forces were attacked. In all 3 incidents, the Air Force, under the guidance of the ground forces, struck the terrorists in order to remove the threat. So after we understand how Hamas operates and why it is interested in buying time, we of course know that diplomatically the central dispute on the Gaza front is about the length of time given to Hamas to disarm. Therefore, Hamas is delaying as much as possible the transition to Phase B, and this is why the last fallen hostage, Ran Gaveli, has not been returned, because in Phase A, the terror organization will be required to give up its rule in the Gaza Strip for the first time since it seized it by force in 2007. It will also be required to give up its weapons, including thousands of AK-47 rifles, machine guns, sniper weapons, mortars, several hundred rockets and explosive charges, and above all, its central military asset, large and branched terror bases underground across many kilometers, which the IDF has not yet discovered and destroyed. Some of them even still exist on the yellow line side under the Israeli control, and despite optimistic reports, the combat engineers still have not found and destroyed all of them. Right now, the concern is that Hamas will put on a show and stage a fake disarmament, and then the mediators will pressure Israel to continue to the second stage, in which Israel is supposed to withdraw from the yellow line. Meanwhile, on the ground, reserve soldiers are holding the yellow line, and they report a surreal reality in which every day they identify armed Hamas operatives deep inside the territory out of more than 10,000 terrorists remaining to the terrorist organization, but they are not allowed to fire at them. The forces underground, such as infantry and armored forces, are allowed to fire only if there is an immediate danger and an ongoing infiltration after they carry out warning fire, and if there is lethal fire towards the soldiers themselves, then they are able to respond with the Air Force or with other accurate measures. And amidst all of this, Hamas shows no signs of planning to disarm. And the fact is that almost all the hostages, and especially the living amongst them, are already home, has lowered heavy pressure off both sides to compromise and to advance towards a Gazan future without Hamas. Israeli intelligence officials assess that senior terrorist organization officials are operating as wanted men and running Hamas from tunnels, while more junior ranks operate above the ground, but under civilian cover and in a more internal mission. For instance, every week more and more Hamas checkpoints are added throughout the wide areas under its control, from Jabalia to parts of Rafah in Gaza. Hamas police also patrol on a daily basis to demonstrate governance, and more municipal departments in the Gaza Strip are returning to function despite the enormous infrastructure damage that the war left behind. Hamas also began to funnel large sums of money, amounting to tens and even hundreds of thousands of shekels every single day, into its recovering treasury, thanks to the increased humanitarian aid that Israel allows to enter the Gaza Strip every single day. This is at the scope of 4,200 trucks per week. This includes close to 600 to 800 trucks every day, including some already from the private sector. These are goods and food items of all kinds which Hamas exploits, and then the private trend is to tax all of these goods and take the money for the ranks to rebuild their capabilities. So the IDF has warned about how Hamas's absolute control of the population in the Gaza Strip for over a decade and a half is paying off for it right now. Not only does the population not revolt against this, despite the destruction of their homes that they suffered because of the murderous invasion to Israel on October 7th, but even the 300,000 trapped tents that Israel brought in for the displaced in the Gaza Strip for the winter were seized by Hamas operatives who distribute them to civilians. Hamas is also beginning to establish pirate kindergartens and schools to allow family events like weddings under the protection of the ceasefire with Israel. And right now, everything again comes down to the Netanyahu-Trump meetings later this month. So, Israel is demanding the transition to Phase B with real disarmament of Hamas of its weapons, and not games and shadows. Even so, in Jerusalem, they believe that in the end, Israel is the one that will have to disarm Hamas, and not the International Stabilization Force, which still has not been established. And here, at TBN Israel, we will continue reporting on every development on this issue, and will continue to bring you the full truth about what's happening in Israel. So keep spreading the truth, share our content with as many people as possible, click the subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem, boots on the ground style. And now, we're switching our focus to Syria, where in recent days, forces of Battalion 52, under the command of the Golan Brigade, arrested a suspected operative of the ISIS terrorist organization. The operation was completed together with the field investigators of Unit 504 from the Intelligence Directorate, and the suspects were transferred for interrogation inside Israel. In addition, during the operation, weapons were located and confiscated. The ISIS suspects were arrested in the town of Afid, which is located in the southern Syrian Golan Heights, and it sits at a strategic point overlooking the border area. This location can help hostile elements collect intelligence on the IDF activity in the area and on infiltration routes into Israel. As a result, the IDF has recently increased engineering activity and patrols in this area to thicken obstacles and maintain high operational control against the backdrop of concerns over terror activity and the arrival of hostile elements as part of creating a security buffer zone. According to IDF assessments, ISIS did not leave Syria, but only changed its patterns of operations and its methods of entrenchment under the new regime, which is failing to hold all territories and to govern all of Syria. In the governmental vacuum that has been created, the Islamic State organization is trying to take control of areas abandoned during the civil war and the flight of Bashar Assad's army, mainly in the east of the country and in the Syrian desert, where the geographic terrain allows its operatives to hide effectively. It is important to emphasize that ISIS also views Syria's new leader, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, as a kind of infidel who strays from the default path after aligning with moderate Sunni Arab elements and, above them, the Americans. Furthermore, ISIS, like other terrorist infrastructures operating in Syria, having learned the operating methods of the emerging Syrian government supported primarily by the United States, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, is trying to pave its way to recruit new operatives and reach places where it is less present, including southern Syria. However, according to security assessments, ISIS still has not managed to entrench itself in southern Syria, and it is in the probing stage while establishing an initial infrastructure. What do you think about all of this situation in Syria? Are we expected to have another Islamic State at the size that we had it before? Let me know in the comments. And meanwhile, last week, the United States military launched Operation Hawkeye against ISIS infrastructures in Syria in response to a deadly ambush by ISIS operatives that resulted in 3 American fatalities. In recent days, dozens of ISIS targets were struck in the eastern area of Syria, and the operation continues in cooperation with Jordanian forces. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on this situation, so keep spreading the truth, be ambassadors of the truth, and help us by praying for this situation. And now, we're staying in the northern arena but switching to the next door in Lebanon. The IDF announced on Sunday that it struck a Hezbollah terrorist in the village of Yair, and 13 minutes later announced another strike in the same village. In the first strike, a vehicle was hit, and in Lebanon, they announced that there was 1 fatality from this strike. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, in the second strike, in which the target was on a motorcycle, another person was injured. Hezbollah's El Manar network reported that the strike was carried out at a distance of only about 30 meters from the first one, and the reports of the strikes comes amid IDF activity to damage Hezbollah's efforts to rearm ahead of the end of the deadline set for the Lebanese government to disarm this terrorist organization. And last Friday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio referred to the situation, saying that the goal in Lebanon is that Hezbollah will not have weapons that can pose a threat to Israel. If a strong government controls the country, Hezbollah will be disarmed. We are doing everything we can to strengthen the Lebanese government. Rubio added that it is clear to everyone that no one wants Hezbollah to be able to threaten the region again and to operate again like an Iranian proxy. It is clear that if they threaten Israel, there will be no peace. So we hope that the talks between Lebanon and Israel will move forward. And I'm not speaking on behalf of the government of Israel. I'm only reporting what they said. And they said that if they feel threatened by Hezbollah, they will act to defend ourselves. However, Iran continues to advance the arming of militias that are affiliated with it all across the Middle East, while operating a sophisticated regional smuggling network. And this is according to reports this week in the Saudi-owned El Arabiya media portal. According to the report, in recent weeks, Iran transferred weapons to the Kurdish militias in northern Syria. The militia operating in the name of the Kurdish interest sees itself threatened by both Turkey and then also by Syria's new government. In parallel, Hezbollah succeeded over the past year in rehabilitating a smuggling network from Iran to the Syrian territory while exploiting the weakness of the Syrian regime and the absence of effective control over wide areas in the countries. The officials emphasized that the limited capabilities of the Lebanese army on the Syrian-Lebanon border also enabled the network to exist. It was further reported that weapons are also transferred to Hezbollah through Lebanon's seaports. In order to block the military buildup, the American administration is working with the governments of Lebanon, of Syria, of Iraq, and of Jordan to strengthen monitoring and the interdiction and the measures along their borders. So in this context, were recently held between American officials and the Iraqi government. A draft for a new security agreement is being examined, aimed at tightening oversight of the movement of people and weapons along the country's borders. And in addition, today, we can introduce you to the Black Line, which is a security line that the IDF created inside southern Lebanon since Operation Arrows of the North. This is a perimeter line, a strip up to 1 kilometer deep from the border in the Lebanese territory that the IDF seeks to keep completely clear of Hezbollah presence and any hostile element. In practice, the meaning is simple. As the ground close to the fence on the Lebanese side is under constant IDF surveillance using ground observations, drones, patrols, ambushes, there is almost no civilian activity there, no agriculture, and no free movement of residents in order to prevent Hezbollah from hiding behind a civilian mask and approaching the border. The goal of the Black Line is to create for the IDF a defense depth to identify a threat while it is still on the Lebanese side, to respond quickly from the air and from the ground, and to prevent infiltration into the northern communities like Dan, Metula, Kfar Yuval, and Kiryat Shmona in Israel. In short, the Black Line is a security belt that Israel holds in Lebanon's territory to keep Hezbollah far from the fence and protect the Israeli home front. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to spread the truth, so help us spread it. Tell a friend, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now we're moving to international affairs, as a Hamas suspect has been exposed in the heart of Lebanon, far from the Gaza Strip and even Doha. The suspect is a 64-year-old British citizen, Yair Birawai, and he has been defined by the intelligence officials as someone who effectively serves as one of Hamas's faces in Europe and manages its activities from quiet offices in the north of the city of London. The British Treasury is now examining whether to impose sanctions on him under the 2019 counter-terror regulations. If he is defined as a designated person, his assets will be frozen and the transfer of funds and resources for him will be prohibited. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has also previously declared that he will act against suspected Hamas operatives on UK soil. Birawai, a West Bank-born British citizen, heads the Palestinian Forum in Britain and was amongst those responsible for the Gaza aid flotillas earlier this year, in which Greta Thunberg participated. These were a classic example of combining Western humanitarian discourse with the interests of an Islamist terrorist movement. Furthermore, Member of Parliament Christian Wakefield mentioned that in 2013, Birawai was marked by Israel as a senior Hamas operative in Europe and described an event in London in 2019 titled Understanding Hamas, in which he was involved. The Intelligence and the Terrorism Information Center think tank also claimed that Birawai publicly praises Hamas and helped establish front organizations for it, including the Palestinian Return Center and the Palestinian Forum, which operate from an ordinary office building in North London. Israeli intelligence officials defined the Return Center as Hamas's organizational arm in Europe as far back as 2010. Also, Birawai was photographed again and again alongside senior Hamas officials, including Ismail Haniyeh and Mahmoud El-Zahar, and presents himself as one of the founders of the International Freedom Flotilla Coalition, whose flotilla was seized by Israel in June. Of course, he and all the organizations linked to him strongly deny any connection to terror, and that they claim political persecution because of these acts. And in the meantime, in London, human rights organizations, mass demonstrations, and respectable figures serve as convenient cover for an extreme Islamic infrastructure that is deepening roots inside the West quietly under the radar until the system decides whether to wake up or not. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you the full truth about what's happening in Israel, in this region, and we invite you to pray, because this is a spiritual war. And the best thing that you can do in this situation is ask God to intervene, to give wisdom to our leaders, to your leaders in this situation, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.